At some point, we thought maybe this is it, time to wrap it up. And it's been able to kind of reinvent itself.
You never want your top 3 clients to be contributing more than 40% of your revenue.
There's other threats, and you always having to almost reinventing yourself because the cycle comes and goes. You need to kind of keep yourself ahead of the competition, what's changing in the marketplace.
I find that so beautifully bullish. Our business is declining. So instead of what we're going to do is like, how are we going to pivot? How are we going to adapt? It's like, no, what we're going to do is acquire other businesses in order to diversify.
The skill set and expertise around the table does help, and having partners to be able to bounce ideas off and share has a lot of benefit.
And there's nothing a market dislikes more than uncertainty.
One of our assets has been definitely our knowledge and skills before the competitors had those skills.
You mentioned that there's been this kind of accelerating change in these macro and micro shifts in business over the years. What did you mean by that? Hi there, and welcome back to the Founder Files. Today, I'm going to be chatting to Nick Durrant. He is the founder and CEO of Bluegrass Digital. It's a Cape Town-based software development firm, agency. It doesn't like the word agency, but it's also based in London. Actually, it was founded originally in London, been going for over 23 years so far. So in this podcast, we start off talking a bit about Bluegrass and how they establish themselves, how they differentiate themselves. But then, as all good conversations go, we go on a massive tangent because what Nick has done on the side with a couple other business partners is started one of the top 5 news publications in South Africa called thesouthafrican.com. And obviously how this started in print, evolved into media, and we just chat about the journey there. And the rest of the podcast really follows on a similar theme of entrepreneurial adaptation over plus 2 decades. And how is it that how we respond to market shifts, how we respond to economic crises, and just how he's adapted his business through all these different points of change in the past 2 decades. So we get into changing omni-channel sales models, we get into different channel partnerships, and we talk about really how it is that he's grown and scaled the business to this point and the different lessons learned throughout these chapters, whether it's COVID, 2008 economic crisis, even now this resurgence of AI. So this story on adaptation is going to be useful to anyone who's really interested in entrepreneurship. And obviously, if you're here, that's you. And if you're not following the podcast, you're going to miss out on all these other amazing episodes from other amazing entrepreneurs in South Africa that have adapted their businesses and built amazing, great models and that are scalable and sustainable. So make sure to like, follow, subscribe to not miss any of these stories, and also to support the podcast and make me happy. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Nick Durrant. Welcome to the Founder Files, the podcast that's like eavesdropping on a conversation with a successful entrepreneur over a fireside chat. Join me, Cameron Coots, through this unique experience of unfiltered stories and insights from scaling founders around the globe as they share their ups, downs, and everything in between. Nick, welcome to the Founder Files. I always enjoy talking to a fellow Civitas member. I think there's a certain shared philosophy towards entrepreneurship that we all bring. But yeah, your quarter century of being an entrepreneur is going to make for great content today and great lessons. So I can't wait to get into it. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Cameron. You make me sound a little bit old there, but hopefully I can add some value to your listeners.
Well, I mean, for all they know, you could have started your first business when you were 8 studying sweets at school. So not necessarily, but welcome to the podcast. So Nick, obviously, the first question I always start off with, right? Help us understand, what is your core business and what is your business model?
So my core business is Bluegrass Digital, and what we do, we're a software development business and very much focused in the area of building web applications, web platforms, mobile applications for clients. So that's anything from, I suppose, enterprise websites to complex products, that digital products that clients want to launch. So we work with quite a diverse range of clients, delivering and supporting their products and platforms.
So within that diversity, I think there's also a risk of many agencies being just another agency. How is it that you differentiate yourself and stand out?
Well, I suppose I don't like the word agency to start with, but we're very much a business, because the agency model doesn't really come with a great attraction given its sort of boom bust nature. But I suppose how we stand out, it really comes from over the years building that experience and expertise. And a lot of that was developed overseas. So if we talk in a South African context, those years over the UK, I spent obviously 16 odd years in the UK and built the business up there. That's stood us in good ground to really launch ourselves into the South African market later in my life when I returned to South Africa. And all the learnings from working with I suppose a matured market in terms of UK and Europe has helped us obviously benefit us here in South Africa. So there's lots to share when we talk more about the business itself.
100%. I want to go full circle back to exactly what you mentioned there, because I love it when I say something and it's like, no, not like that at all. It's like, cool, then let's talk about what it actually is. So yeah, just on the topic of agency versus like what your identity is as a business. First, I want to ask that, but then I'm curious around the fact that you say that it's a different model. Can you just explain the difference between an agency versus what your business is, and then what the two models are and how they're different?
I suppose that to correct myself, they're not entirely different. I mean, an agency is a service provider in itself, and we provide IT and software development services. But we come from I come from quite a business background, a family of entrepreneurs and business. So from this, I didn't come in as a creative as such. I came in very much with a business-led approach, which meant from the get-go, it was all about the commercial engagement, ensuring we're running and obviously building the right products and to the right quality, but ensuring it's done with the right business principles. And that's talking about things like processes, the right people, delivering it in a profitable way, not simply just delivering something that is going to wow the client, but I may have lost money doing it because I'm trying to build some kudos at the same time. So everything has been really factored around obviously profit and loss type of processes within our business. Some of the agencies are obviously chaotic environments. We've been very much about building processes from the get-go.
Okay. No, I think what you mentioned there, the word creative, stood out for me, because often with pure creatives, there's an element of chaos that we love at that time, because that's when we can be a bit unencumbered in our approach of creation and building. But to your point, it's either way the service being provided is the service being provided, but how it's being run as a business is the fundamental difference. Because even to that point is, I think agency, and I do think highly creative. And I think what you're implying is that doesn't mean that you're not creative, but the reason why the word doesn't stick is because it's far more of a professional approach that you've taken with these business fundamentals from the beginning.
Yes, and I think creative agencies are led by creative people. They're often started by either someone who's left a larger business or larger agency and started on their own, and they've come from very creative beginnings and do very good work. Not to say that work is actually ends up being a profitable piece of work. I think some businesses get it right when you blend the right sort of skills together in terms of those running the business in a operational way that's efficient and makes sense, and versus the creative. So you need a blend of both from that perspective. We very much came from a technical beginning. So as the digital world emerged, it was kind of an emergence of both creativity and software development. The world where suddenly you have to bring these techies together with a pretty interface, that users are going to love. So that's how obviously the internet sort of it grew, bringing kind of traditional development people together with very creative people in terms of the digital products interfaces that we see today.
Got you. So it's really the view of, besides the design element, really just functionality to begin with, and just good business principles.
Yeah, so I think that's the basis of it from the day one, having the more business acumen in terms of within your business. So if you don't have it, it's something that you should seek out or bring into your business. I started my business with my brother essentially, So it's very much a family dynamic. We both were very much around building, going out and focused on the commercial side. So beginning everything with a sales approach, going out to sort of look for partnerships and clients that way around. And then, yes, we needed to deliver the work, but that was kind of the next step in the phase. And so we built the business very much from the typical, sales funnel, to delivery, to support, and then kind of improve that as we went along, as time went on.
Okay, so Nick, we've spoken a bit about the model, obviously how it's different to an agency and your philosophy, but just let me understand the kind of scale that Bluegrass is at now. I mean, you've got some amazing clients. I mean, Coronation stands out to me as a cool logo on your website. What would you say the scale of Bluegrass Digital is at now?
I mean, we're around 50 people. We very much a consultancy style business because we've quite focused around certain technologies that we support, vendor platforms that we support. So we've always grown. In the early days, we were all about building content management, dynamic websites. This goes back to the London days when, you move from static pages. I mean, I know it sounds incredible, but back in the day, there was, quite revolutionary to have a web page up on the internet. And moving to dynamic and into e-commerce. So, back in the early days, we were building these as custom tools, each time for the client. But subsequently, they've become, large-scale platforms in the content management space, and we've become specialists in 2 or 3 of those. So when we're building websites, like for Coronation, we've used a platform which is kind of widely used overseas called Optimizely, formerly Episerver, and that was a big factor in them selecting us. So, probably even more popular platforms in the CRM space, Salesforce, you get specialist companies that are very much focused around implementing Salesforce solutions for clients. We were very much around building and implementing solutions for customers on those particular content management systems, which really helps clients manage the content on their websites, not only websites, in some cases through multiple channels. It has a kind of omni-channel ability, which some of the clients use, obviously pushing content to social channels, different mobile apps and that sort of thing from one central platform. So, that's one area that's the early days of where our kind of specialization focus emerged from. That then moved into e-commerce, especially in London, where e-commerce was starting to grow, between 2000 and 2010. Selling your products online became very much a trend, and we got involved in doing projects for that. And then, I suppose with the emergence of mobile applications, late 2000s, probably 15 years ago, we started dabbling in mobile applications because it just felt like a natural, it's a new space that, clients were starting to invest, their brands in, as the emergence of mobile phones became more and more popular. And that became another practice within the business. So there's very much a strong kind of mobile application development side to the business today.
Awesome. And in terms of your reach, right? So you've got enterprise level clients in South Africa, you've got clients in the UK. How many other geographies have you really served or currently serve?
Well, I suppose the benefit of the business is there's no real geography limit, because you really running an internet business. You're building platforms for clients, and you can deliver that, to anywhere in the world, through the internet. So we've worked with clients all over the world. We've got clients in the US, clients in Australia, clients in Holland, clients obviously a lot in the UK, a lot in South Africa and Africa. We tend to focus a lot in our time zone. So, it's either East Coast of the US, UK, predominantly Western Europe, and Africa, which is, and the Middle East to a point. So we worked in probably various markets over the years. I could list 10 or 20 countries that we've done work in. But we very much focused on building from both our South African office and our UK office, in terms of our relationship with customers.
Cool. Thanks for that context. I mean, the fact that you are at 50 people now, you said 20 different geographies. I think it makes a lot of sense that you're targeting predominantly English-speaking markets within a similar time zone. I mean, you've got these enterprise-level clients like Coronation in South Africa. You've got 2 offices. I mean, it's at a pretty good place. So before we get into this story, because this is your core business, I mean, this is not the only business that you're an entrepreneur of and an owner of over the years. So I just want to get an understanding of those and unpack those, and we'll come back to Bluegrass shortly.
Yeah, there's been 3 or 4 others. I think principally Bluegrass has stuck all the way through that as the commonality. Along the way, we've encountered and learned, as you engage with other customers, you learn about their businesses. And during the early days, during .com era, I suppose, circa 2002, 2003, we had a client and we decided to dabble in the e-commerce space, retail essentially, because we were buying in all sorts of homeware products and trying to sell that through a brand. That was a good and fairly short learning experience about retail, buying stock, trying to sell stock, not, I suppose, with mixed success, but as soon as any money comes in, it goes straight into the next batch of stock. So that was one particular business called Congo Joe back in London. Another one which is still around today is a media business a publishing business called The South African. It started life in London very much as an expat newspaper for South Africans living in the UK. From around 2002, it was launched as a print product that you would pick up at a tube station. But as time has gone on and print has sort of died off, as well as the expat market, and with us returning to the South Africa, that business has morphed into a online digital platform now, and being one of the biggest South African focused platforms around mainstream news, called the SouthAfrican.com. So that's been another experience. I'm not operationally involved in that day to day, but that's something that's also been born out of our sort of entrepreneurial spirit in the early days.
The reason why I love having an unstructured podcast is because I can take a tangent and run with it. I'm very curious about the point that you mentioned that the expat market has declined. Can you elaborate on that? I mean, one thing I'm obviously experiencing and noticing in South Africa is there's obviously the reverse. I don't know what the reverse is, a brain drain is, brain swell happening in terms of coming back to everyone that's gone overseas. A lot of people coming back to South Africa. But obviously you picked up a slight different trend in the expat market earlier. Talk to me about what's shifted there.
Well, I think that just was a matter of time in terms of policy changes. I went over the mid-90s, which was almost the beginning of the 2-year working visa, if you recall that back in the day when they opened up South African accountants, IT specialists could go over and work in London for 2 years. If you weren't a British citizen, you could go as on a 2-year working visa. And that grew quite substantially, certainly into the mid-2000s. And it basically built a very large South African market there, and the newspaper was really there to serve that South African, away from home. And there were lots of companies and advertisers essentially that were supporting and servicing that market. I mean, they talked about 1 million plus South Africans living in London and the surrounds, working, in accountancy, banks, and so forth. So those policies changed sort of, I suppose, late 2000s, and there was that sort of, I suppose, those gates closed, and then came the credit crisis, late 2008, 2009, and a lot of South Africans were somewhat given a an ultimatum to, either lose their jobs or maybe, transfer back to South Africa. So that kind of was also merging with the fact that print was dying, and digital, was starting to take over. So I think we printed the last copy in 2014. So that was really at the end. And then that's where the business almost was on the brink, in the sense of trying to reinvent, and what do we do now with this brand, targeting an expat market that essentially is withering. And then, through some decision making, we decided to build this digital platform, obviously news portal essentially. And eventually the traffic started to shift towards South Africa, from being sort of 80% UK based to now 80-90% South African based over a period of sort of 5 years. So, now as far as rankings goes, in the top sort of 3 or 4 largest news publications in South Africa. So, that's an example probably of a business that, probably at some point we thought, maybe this is it. We time to wrap it up, and it's been able to kind of reinvent itself, and almost a completely new audience that is primarily focused on news, across obviously the different channels, to a very South African audience. So yeah, I mean that's another story to share.
I think let's stick with this. There's so much in this around why. There's just a clear reason that if you'd said, okay, cool, we're going to pack this up and be like, this business is dead, there's like a lot of reasons to justify why, right? I think to the point of the expat market fundamentally changing, which means that the value prop of what you're bringing is now different. The fundamental shift in like social media and technology and media in general, that industry fundamentally changing, meaning the medium and within which you're even communicating now rapidly changes as well. And so regardless of the expat market, people's ability to get information and news is at the touch of their fingertips, and they can do it how they want. So it means that just the product changes, the market changes. And so many people and businesses would have just been like, well, I guess we're done, right? We're not going to make it through this. So I just want to unpack a bit more of that decision making, of how the change happened and really how you kind of shifted that market, because it sounds like the decision was relatively clear. I think there's the benefit of I think there's the third type of luck got to do with just naturally your kind of skill sets, and what it is that you had with Bluegrass means that you can transition into a digital space quite easily. But then obviously rebuilding the market sounded quite organic. So I just want to go through that in a bit more detail and understand just the decision making to make the change, what signaled it, and how did you go about doing it?
Okay, so I think being very business orientated and focused on the financials, we have a few other partners in that business. One of them is a CA, so there's a close eye on how are we performing. So we could see it obviously as the user, the audience starts to die essentially, or reduce. That obviously our numbers start to also reduce. So we knew, and as the world over, that print, the writing was on the wall and had been for some time. Everyone knew what digital was going to do long term. And we've subsequently seen many magazines and print publications, disappear. So I think we also tried to diversify during that period, over 5 or 6 years, by acquiring defunct titles or titles that were trying to be offloaded within London. It was a very different take. It was almost like a horizontal move in terms of moving into.
Sorry,
a different
when you mean by
vertical.
defunct titles?
Well, they were kind of, someone was trying to close them up, and we would say, okay, we'll buy that off you. We'll buy that title. So one was a In London magazine, for example, focused on events and news and what's happening within London. So it was very much a different play, still in publishing, but nothing to do with the South African audience. So we were trying to diversify the business into other publishing areas to try and see how we could extend the business, as our main title was starting to shrink essentially.
Sorry, Nick, before you continue, I just want to understand what exactly was being purchased and acquired at that point. So the fact that were you purchasing another publishing business? Were you purchasing essentially more like the IP and like branding and name of this, and then you would essentially promote your own content there? Like what was actually being acquired?
So we were essentially buying another title.
What do you mean by title? Is the title like the Sunday Times basically?
Yes, exactly. Sorry. So the title is another, it's probably terminology in the publishing industry when they say we're buying a title, but it's another magazine brand, if you want to call it that, like the Sunday Times. There was one called In London. There was one called TNT at the time, which was also a well-known publication to South Africans and Australians and New Zealanders. We had tried various things. I remember conversations happening with others trying to form maybe a joint venture. And this is all to do with a kind of changing market, the turmoil in that you're looking at other ways of extending your life or growing your business, which was a publishing business. So we had the one title and we were trying to diversify by looking at other opportunities to grow new magazines or new titles in that space. And I think we did try a few and put some money into that, but a lot of them failed and didn't continue. So there's always been some resistance when you start something new. We try and start things fairly at a low cost because we have the skills, we have the operational tools to start anything. But obviously starting a title, you've got to understand the market and what works and what doesn't. At the same time, when digital was emerging, obviously we had already launched a news portal to support the title.
Sorry, Nick, I'm going to jump in here because I've got so many questions to get into the depth before we even get into the format and the portal. I find that so beautifully bullish, right? It's like our business is declining. So instead of what we're going to do is like, how are we going to pivot? How are we going to adapt? It's like, no, what we're going to do is acquire other businesses in order to diversify, which makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, the approach towards diversification is really to de-risk the profitability of the core business model and the core business, and taking that approach. So talk me through that kind of process and that thinking, right? Specifically, if I had to summarize, like, what were the lessons that you learned in that period? Like, what did you think were the positives that you learned from that? What were some mistakes?
Well, I suppose it depends on anyone's perspective. I'm probably, as far as my partners, maybe slightly more conservative than them, but I think some of the resilience is a big word, because obviously you hold on, because for some they may decide like throwing the towel, and looking at new avenues and trying different things, and they can be done at a fairly low cost. Understanding the market is an important thing. I think we were learning about publishing as a business, not coming from being journalists or anything. So there was lots of things that were trial and error. And we were being disrupted by this new digital world that was emerging in from a publishing perspective. When you've got a product that's primarily print and has worked well for you, and it starts to sort of almost slowly wither down, and although you're trying to adapt and cut costs and be more operationally kind of tighter with how you deliver it, your margins dwindling as your revenue and readership does. So there was a lot of resilience through that time. There's a lot of trial and error of trying to do different things, launch different products within the product.
Such as?
Well, I remember we were looking at launching sort of an FX product, which we could use the publication as a marketing tool, in terms of a service to South Africans. There were quite a few of those around already. We launched an events business, for example. So we used to do like South African events around London, Freedom Day events. We would run the bar, make money through running a bus trip for South Africans and doing a pub crawl sort of event. So we were trying to sort of diversify from our title into other products, and launch various things. And some were successful, but it was the long-term viability of those, that, they were popular to start with, but over time, that popularity sort of waned a bit, I suppose, because you're always talking to the same audience, and that audience had, tasted it once, but maybe they were going to be going on a pub crawl every 3 months.
And the nature of news is like the first 3 letters. It's got to be new.
No, it's got to be new, and it's and you are targeting a very small market. It's quite a niche market. It's a South African working and living in London, and because that market was starting to get smaller, the advertising opportunities through the publication, those attending events was also getting smaller. So, some of the advertisers were also saying, we're moving towards a digital strategy. So you were moving from a print advertiser because it was a free publication, and we relied heavily on advertising revenue. So as that shifted, we had to sort of build digital tools to support and get the sales team to be able to sell kind of both a print and a digital product. So we've learned a lot through that process. I suppose the point at where we decided maybe, should we throw the towel in, maybe it was around 2011, 2012. It was because, the business was losing money. We were probably thinking to ourselves, let's focus on, our other businesses that are doing well. But there was always something in the title, because it had some value in it. It's like saying there's value in IP. There's this intrinsic value in the title. And then, I suppose there was a period which, things started to point towards this growing audience in South Africa through the digital platform. Maybe South Africans, as you pointed out earlier, looking to leave and go overseas, they were interested in the content overseas. And we just noticed how the traffic started to shift a bit. We picked up a few new advertisers. Programmatic advertising started to become a thing, and we, I suppose, rebuilt the website to support that. And eventually, it's almost like, as you talk about pivoting, it's kind of how you morphed into something different as a product, and it's almost like a new business has emerged from it, if you get what I'm saying, in that sense, because you always all have to bring new skills to the table as well, because your staff are so used to building something for print. Now designing, designers that lay out publications, suddenly, there's no need for that anymore. So there's also an operational shift as well that needs to happen to support that new kind of found business within a business, if you know what I mean. It's like, rising from the ashes, like the what's it called? The eagle or the phoenix. Yeah.
Just because the picture that's painting in my mind here is that when you are in control of a publication, and especially at this point having multiple titles, obviously the main revenue stream is advertising. But when you have control over advertising, you also in many ways have control over distribution. And so the fact that you already have a market that you can really distribute to, it makes sense that we can diversify and think about what other new products or other businesses that can really target this market and generate revenue from, to balance out what it is that's syncing with the media side of things. And that's not just the view of sticking to what is the core business that we are in as well, and how do we get this going. It's about the fact that how is we as the shareholders, directors, entrepreneurs, how is it that we can still utilize what we have here to still win in one way or another, which is, again, I love as an entrepreneurial spirit, because I think that's the difference between an entrepreneur and probably like a professional manager, if you will, is because they'll look at this and it's like, how is it that we can fix this core thing? They won't think laterally in terms of, well, how do we use this core capability? But then still coming full circle was this realization, well, if this is still declining, if there's a niche market, obviously this as much as we can utilize this in other ways, we still need to kind of protect this still at the front end, right? Whether it's like where people are coming in through. And we now actually even have more reason to double down on this and get this to fix this, because there's other entities and P&Ls that are benefiting from this as well. And so I think if it wasn't for those other products that you created, those other businesses, there maybe would have been less of a motivation to go and figure out how is it that we pivot this core business to begin with. And that's a hypothetical, obviously, of course, because the nature of the story is the nature of the story. But then you now transitioned into the digital space, and now the business naturally changed fundamentally. So you moved into digital. How did the business model change? I'd like to pause here for a moment to talk about why it is that we run the Founder Files in the first place, why we've done over 100 episodes, and why we have no intention of stopping anytime soon, and how it is that we go about actually funding this so consistently. And to start off with, the purpose of the Founder Files is to give established entrepreneurs practical stories and insights from people that have been there before, so you can avoid years of trial and error in scaling your own business. And the reason why this is so important to us is it relates very directly to what the purpose of Metavolve is, which is the entity that funds the Founder Files in the first place. And that is to accelerate the time it takes for entrepreneurs to build businesses that are able to thrive without them. Practically what that looks like is our mission statement, to ensure that as many founders as possible can take a holiday where they actually switch off whilst their business keeps growing. And the reason why this mission is so important to us is because as many entrepreneurs, we built these businesses to potentially work less, right? Have a sense of freedom, but we found ourselves working harder than ever. And we thought when we conquered these original problems around survivability and getting to product market fit, we then achieved growth. And then the nature of the problems that we have now fundamentally changed. And we found ourselves working harder than ever, right? We're working longer hours, we're making harder decisions, people are coming to us, we're having to put out fires, and it can feel so intense, and we're constantly getting pulled back into operations because of the fundamental reason that no one knows our business like we do. And this is where Metavolve comes in. We use strategy as the process to really download all of your knowledge, all your thinking about your business, about your market, about your product into your management team so that they can be empowered to execute while you focus on growth or frankly doing what it is that you want with your time. So if you want to hear more about what Metavolve does and how Metavolve can help you attain a new level of freedom in your scale up, then click on the link in the description below and let's have a chat and a curiosity call to see how I can share some of the insights I've learned from working with and interviewing over 200 business owners in the past 3 and a bit years. But that's it from me for now. Let's get back to the episode.
One other key point I forgot to mention is that we actually brought in a new shareholder at the time who was UK based, and they'd exited a business, a community digital publication business in the past 5 years. So they came with also skills how to build digital platforms and run communities, which essentially it is. So there was a decision made at the time. You know, it all made sense, and then there were 4 partners suddenly. So that also contributed to helping us guide on the shift towards digital, which is kind of, we all realized that was the future because print was on the way out. So the skill set and expertise around the table does help, in terms of any entrepreneur, and having partners to be able to bounce off ideas off and share it has a lot of benefit. I know there are many that are individual entrepreneurs, and that is a much more lonely place to be. And you do need a lot of support, in terms of if you bring it in as mentorship or advisory, but it's very useful in your day-to-day to have that in your kind of leadership team. So we moved towards digital. That meant we had to kind of transition our team from, you were physically distributing newspapers around London. We had a distribution, we had scooters, we had the physical kind of operation, and distribution in the new world is online. It's about pushing your product into channels. It's social media. So we had to relearn or learn a lot of those skills as we went along, and bring in the right skills. In terms of publishing content online versus publishing content in a print publication. So there was a transition period, and there was a lot of learning on the go that went on. And also how you maximize spend and how you sold an advert online, which was, didn't seem to provide the same level of value that you would when you put a nice big piece of advertising in a newspaper or a full page advert. So trying to monetize that online was a challenge in the early days, and a lot of learning went on. Today it's far more established with programmatic and Google AdWords and all sorts of tools that, AI tools that help you look for the right sort of pricing models and so forth within your kind of programmatic. But that's only part of it as well. You still need to be selling advertisers and campaigns to direct to customers as well. So there's still a dual kind of function in terms of how you generate revenue online for publishing organizations like ourselves today. So a lot of it's almost blurry that this, as time has gone on, we've learned a lot over that period of time. But I think the skills that we earned early on have benefited us, certainly with the competition in say the South African market, where they pivoted quite late in the day as the traditional newspapers have to shift to online, and we were much more agile, flexible. We didn't come with large, I suppose, print rooms and large kind of news desks, and carrying a lot of staff, because it's quite a big decision to sort of cut that all out very quickly. So our agility has definitely benefited us to move fast and pivot quite quickly across those years that we moved towards what is today the South African.com.
So obviously want to accelerate now over the past decade or so, because the story that we're in is in the early 2010s. But now, with the South African.com, you are, like you said, one of the top 5 publications in the country. That's incredible. Just talk me through how you managed to get from really something that was orientated towards an expat market, pivoting onto digital, to, one of the top publications in South Africa now.
Well, I think it talks to what I mentioned before around the understanding the digital market and what works. I think there's been a big emphasis on our early on social media as a platform to deliver content. So if you think about where users were accessing a lot of their content in the early days, a lot of it was through social media channels. Subsequently, although that's still a point, there's been other channels that have emerged as well. But in the early days, I think a lot of the competition were doing that, so we were able to sort of capture a growing younger audience, if you want to call it that was very much focused around digital and mobile accessing content. Because let's be honest, today not many of us go and browse websites for their news. We're accessing our news through all sorts of readers, social channels, different feeds coming from different ways. So we were quite good early on accessing those different channels before others were doing it, and that helped us grow that audience quite quickly. And then moved up the ranks, because there are IEB sort of rankings that determine the top publications which advertisers use in terms of accessing information and data around, like, different audience groups, and which advertisers have sizable audiences in particular kind of segments. So we moved, very early on. We were probably 20 plus, but we moved up over 2 or 3 years, moved up into the top 10. And then, we grew an audience which, up to sort of 7 or 8 million users, a month. And that fluctuates based on news and importance, because traffic is very driven around kind of the good and the bad in terms of the news world. That's kind of where I would say one of our assets has been definitely our knowledge and skills, before the competitors had those skills.
Sure. Okay. So you've got the South African truly performing now, right? So it's like one of the top 5 publications in the country. Like you've built this to the point because of your agility in the digital space, kind of like forced to adapt that way early because of what happened in the UK market. So you're kind of ahead of the times in South Africa, which is a really strong suit that you've had. But what I love is that this is still just a hard side hustle for you. I mean, you've got millions of users per month, and this isn't even your core business. So obviously it makes me even more curious to get into what your core business is. So let's get back to Bluegrass. And I mean, we understand a bit about the model, but about the scale that you're at now. But talk to me just like full circle back to what the founding story is.
Well, the founding story goes back to, goes back to probably when I left South Africa after university in early 96. Went over to London like many young South Africans did, probably with an initial idea to spend a year there and get some work experience before I go back and continue my studies and do a postgrad. But I started working in the London city, a lot of banking, earning, as a contractor, earning decent money, enjoying my life as a youngster, which I did. So I learned a lot about the corporate world, I suppose, in those early days, as you were so sort of green in terms of how business operates and how these big banks make money. And I thought to begin with, I would be a typical banker, and that was my life and career. But as I worked, I realized, working for someone else is not really what my ambition is, and I didn't really like that aspect of it. And then at the same time, the dot-com period was emerging. It's the days when I worked in a bank and there was not even email as a tool. I remember actually the bank rolling out email programs in those days, and I decided, as my brother had at university with his cousin, had started Bluegrass, which was a IT jack of all trades type company back then, because you did a bit of everything. I decided to start Bluegrass London, very much in the kind of web development space, late 90s. So while I was working, I was kind of side hustling to get the business going, and to a point when I decided, okay, I'm leaving now. I need to give it 100% go. So working from my bedroom in Fulham somewhere, every day, getting up and putting in the call, starting to build the business, networking, looking for new business, and earning pretty much nothing in those early days. And that's where it all began, in terms of like 1999, I suppose, was when I went it alone to build the business. And it sort of started to grow through partnerships and networking on the ground, finding business, getting the work done in South Africa, as there was a Cape Town office already. So we were already kind of starting that sort of offshore model before it even was a trend. And things were looking good, where the business was growing nice. We made some good partnerships through our South African network and connections we had there. Then 2001 came, and that was
Sorry,
the
before you jump
dot-com.
into 2001, when you said partnerships, what kind of partnerships?
So a lot of our strategy was working with large agencies, digital agencies. So these emergence of these first generation digital agencies, as there was a huge explosion of big brands wanting to build applications and websites for e-commerce and all sorts of reasons. So we started to partner with and build partnerships, i.e. we would say to them, we can do the work at a lower cost, or give us the work that's not exciting to you. If it's under £20,000, we can get it done at lower cost in South Africa. So we started to pick up work through those channels, if you want to call them business partnerships or channels. And that's where lots of opportunities came in those early days, up until the dot-com collapse, when a lot of those big businesses or partnerships we had disappeared overnight, in terms of their clients foreclosed on them and they foreclosed on us, essentially, and they went bust. So we were owed a lot of money in those days, with, I don't know, 30, 40,000 pound, which was a lot of money to us as a small business. And we couldn't survive, so we had to kind of cut a lot of the team and downsize and get back to basics, if you want to call it that, and which is what we did. And because we still saw the opportunity existed, I think a lot of decisions were made in the dot-com era, not out of proper business principles. There was kind of a crazy period, and we went back to basics, and as a service provider still went out and still applied the same model. We found businesses, new relationships where we could get work done, but also went direct to market. So, we found small retailers that wanted to build e-commerce sites. So slowly but surely we rebuilt that business again. And, I think things were definitely done a lot more sensibly in those days. And Bluegrass started to grow, and we experienced something similar around 2008, 2009 with the credit crisis, which was a bit of a bloodbath in the UK. But we survived that. That was just being sensible, having to make a few cuts of costs and trading carefully through that period because it was quite short-lived. But I came back to South Africa in 2011, and we continued the business. We had an office in Cape Town already, serving a team in London. We had a project management team. So we shifted that business to route into Cape Town directly. So phones, routed into Cape Town. So we moved it into a proper sort of offshore kind of setup. I think the world was starting to move into offshoring. So clients were comfortable with it. And probably around that time, the emergence of digital in South Africa started to appear in terms of brands and companies investing in their websites, investing in products, platforms, as they shifted towards a digital strategy, as they shifted towards e-commerce. So we found more opportunities start to appear in South Africa. And the value, started to grow as well. So probably in the last 10, 12 years, a lot of growth has come out of South Africa in terms of opportunities, because we've almost went through what the UK went through 10 years later. So we almost had our own digital revolution over the last sort of 10 years or so, which, the UK had 10 years before that. So, I suppose we're still doing a lot of what we have always done, essentially writing code, crafting products and platforms for clients. We've started to diversify, as I mentioned earlier, around mobile applications, bringing that into it. For example, COVID was actually a good time for us, in the sense that, we found a lot of our customers pivoting and wanting to build new products and platforms during that period. So, we actually grew quite well over the last 3 or 4 years as a business, which is fantastic. But, we're in a world that's, you're still running it operationally, efficiently, with right processes, but you are threatened by other factors all the time. There's competition, but there's also AI, you mentioned earlier. There's other threats, and you always having to, if I can say, you're almost reinventing yourself as a business, because any business, the cycle comes and goes. You need to kind of keep yourself ahead of the competition. What's changing in the marketplace? What does AI mean? Because often it's a marketing buzzword for a period of time before it actually starts to take hold. So we're already using AI in our development tools and development processes in the business, starting to build it into a few solutions. Some of our platform products that we support have AI tools built into it. So we are adapting as we go, into bringing and making sure we on top of the latest trends in the world that we operate in.
So Nick, I want to go back to the early part of your journey, because what stood out for me is a quote that I'm sure you've heard as well, but a business with a great product but crap distribution is never going to be able to outperform a business with great distribution and a crap product. Now, I'm no way saying that you've got a crap product, but I think the point there is, it's like what you need to be getting right, and what's most important in the first case is distribution. And so I think starting off at that point of going to these larger entities and saying, listen, you still want to obviously have customers coming through you. You want to be known for that. But, do you want to be handling this work? Is it the best place for your attention and time and profitability? Let us handle it for you. It's an amazing way to get started, because it's like you can just actually focus on the operations of it. Because especially when you're a service provider, I mean, how we make business, we're both professional services, is reputation, relationships, and referrals. And so rather to accelerate that journey and get the distribution of someone else, I think is really, really awesome and really smart. But then obviously, as you said, puts your business at risk, is because if they start struggling, then you've essentially outsourced your distribution. So you have to handle your own kind of sales and marketing engine. So I guess just talk to me around what are like the pros and cons of that approach and that model and that first adaptation that you had to make from a sales perspective.
Well, I think it makes it a lot easier from a sales perspective, and you see it everywhere, the kind of the partner channel model, if you want to call it that, where you building a relationship with one client that potentially is going to send you multiple streams of business. And that was the kind of idea around it, because it's far easier to have a conversation, because a lot of these businesses either didn't have the skill set, so they needed a partner, technical partner in the expertise that we carried, because when opportunities came along, they could fulfill them. So there was a benefit, a two-way benefit really for both sides. And that still applies today. And the other one was capacity, because sometimes, yes, they may have the expertise, but sometimes it's limited. So then when they win 2 or 3 projects, they need a partner to help deliver, as the nature of projects go. Once you deliver, kind of, you don't need all the kind of hands on deck that you had during the project. So that model works well. I do agree with your point, obviously, around eggs in one basket, because I think it's just one of the strategies that we employ. I think direct to market, B2B, in a sense, going, finding customers, RFPs, opportunities. That is another channel, and focused around either in the vertical you want to focus in or a number of verticals. So we have learned that lesson of putting all your eggs in one basket early on, because we had a partner which, probably 60% of our business, 60, 70, which was a huge percentage. And you do hear this quite regularly with businesses being built up, that if they hit hard times or lose a lot of clients, it's going to have a direct impact on you. So it's very difficult to say no, because they say, we're going to keep bringing you more business, and you keep being able to deliver that, or, keep building off the back of that to deliver that. And then suddenly, very quickly, it can all kind of implode, because they either hit the wall or something, some large event happens that changes all that. So suddenly you go from 60, 70% down to, 30% of what you had. So it's a huge, and in the nature of our businesses and services, you're carrying a lot of people. We are a people business, and that obviously helps us deliver the work that we do. So, the impact becomes very much directly close to your business in terms of people and their livelihoods and so forth. So, multi-channel strategy is always important. Multi kind of pronged approach is quite important. And we are built up on our, as you mentioned earlier, on our reputation and experience and our case studies, because that's what we are. We're a service provider. So showing that ability, that experience is very much part of that sales process. And I always say you're only as good as your last project. So, I mean, if you do a poor job and deliver poorly, you would have potentially lost that client for good, because they won't invite you back to do the next project.
Exactly. You're only as good as your last job.
Exactly. Same concept. So I think, all your eggs in one basket, there's a lot to say for that saying, in the sense of, having a multi-pronged approach, but being quite deliberate about recognizing that if you are in a situation where you've got one major client, is to force diversification in your business in terms of looking for other clients in other areas to have a more balanced approach to business.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think even from a sales perspective, it makes more sense to do that, and just from your own peace of mind and anxiety. But what I find super interesting is that Metavolve, who's a partner of ours, and we utilize their technology around business valuations in part of our offering. So we'll do a high-level valuation on a company before looking at their scaling readiness. And one of the scenarios that you tweak and pull there is what percentage of your revenue is contributed by your biggest 3 clients. And it's obviously got these tiers in terms of like greater than 75%, 60 to 75, 50 to 60, etc. But the point there is like that has got such a material impact on the valuation of your company, because the point there is it's that if someone's going to acquire the business, how much risk are they taking on? But also what it shows is such a critical relationship dependency. So now it's even if I had to acquire this business, it's like the relationships that you have with those 3 key people means that like this business is still heavily dependent on you. And so what's actually being purchased here? So, I mean, obviously I could take the conversation down from an exit route, but the point I'm trying to emphasize here is that it's such a key fundamental towards business that it's even pulled into valuation methodologies around ensuring that you really have de-risked your client dependency. And a general rule of thumb there is that you never want your top 3 clients to be contributing more than 40% of your revenue. Because if something like that happens, it's like, even if it's 20%, like what can happen is like a service provider net profit margin, as you go, 20% of your revenue gets cut. That's like, now we're basically at break even for the next few months from a profitability perspective in terms of how we're floating the business. So it's just, but it's a good principle, but obviously now the practicality of doing that and growing that is a different element. So how did you then evolve that omni-channel approach? And I think more what I'd like to understand is, because this isn't a startup podcast, scale-up podcast, what is that omni-channel approach now? Like, what are the different ways that you go about generating new business and leads? And which would you say are your most effective routes?
Yeah, so I suppose hindsight taught me that in those days. There was definitely not as much resources as there are today for business scale-ups or startups, and given we're talking 15, 20 years ago. But yeah, I think you have to be quite deliberate around your strategy of guarding against having everything with 1 or 2 clients. So we operate across different verticals, and there's probably a whole podcast on pros and cons around that as well. But we still operate on a partnership strategy. So we seek our partners where they would use us as a technical partner in helping them deliver their work.
Such as?
And that's probably so let's take an advertising agency, for example. Many have tried to build capability. Some have done it, some limited, some have done it and failed. And probably because it's not their core business and they don't really understand the kind of dynamic of development companies. But working with them as an example, where they may have a client and they want to build a mobile app or a website, they're probably not in a position where they're doing that enough to hire dedicated teams. So they would seek out a partner to help them deliver that specialist a need for their client. And we would then seek out those partnerships. So if it's building a website for a big brand or building a mobile application, that's one particular strategy. So it could be advertising agencies, it could be IT companies that don't have skills in kind of building apps, for example. So there are various partnership approaches you could take in terms of building up various channels of business opportunity. So it's not only one partnership that's going to deliver you 60% of your revenue. You want to diversify those relationships, as well as obviously direct to market. So, we've done a number of, you mentioned Coronation, we've done a number of financial services clients, both overseas and in South Africa over the years. You could call us, we have a niche in that space. Airlines, we've launched KenyaAirways.com last year for them on a new designed website platform with booking and integration. We've subsequently picked up a few other opportunities in the airline space. So you become very focused in those niches. So we've developed strategies around that in terms of our experience that we spoke about, the case studies, to go after other clients that are looking to do similar sort of projects. And we, we also have our name in the hat on when it comes to RFPs, for example. So that's always another popular opportunity, being invited to, and generally, you identify those based on your chances because they're highly competitive, but we also look at like our skills. In South Africa, we find generally that we're a bigger fish in a smaller pond compared to competing for these similar sort of projects in London, for example, because you're dealing with a far more competitive market. So you need to diversify your strategy and have a team that can support that as well, in terms of sales and new business.
So exactly on that, I want to double down on the approach within the UK, I guess internationally and within South Africa. What's the distinction and difference? Because like you said, they're fundamentally different markets, very different competitive environments. How is it that you change your approach in the UK versus South Africa?
Well, I suppose one of the key benefits is that everything started in the UK for us, because I often am asked by South African companies, how did you get going in the UK, or how we want to launch in the UK? I suppose everyone wants a business that's going to be international and earn pounds or euros. But, one big benefit was actually I suppose grew up business-wise in the UK, and my early network developed there. So from a networking perspective, building business relationships, that was a huge benefit. I think it's very difficult to go over there as a South African business and think what I've done successfully in South Africa is going to work there. You're in one of the centers of the world to start with. So and no one knows who you are. And you may have done a project for Coronation or Clover, but no one knows who that is, to be honest. So you are, in a sense, starting again. I think a lot of companies have made mistakes. I think one of the learnings there is to make sure, if you're launching an office in those countries, is that you hire local people. It's often a huge investment that many don't want to make early on, but hiring local networked people that are in your field, and hiring them to launch your sales office or putting them in as an MD or whatever it might be. I think that's got a huge benefit. Thinking you could send over someone in your team that wants to immigrate or go and live over there, they're arriving very green off the boat and not really knowing anything on anyone, and having to build that from the ground up takes a long time.
But I think to expand on that is that I think the general bias for anyone in the world is a preference to work with people locally, unless they're obviously looking for some kind of cost arbitrage of going overseas. But it's like, at least from a relationship perspective, there's always going to be a relatively local bias.
Yeah, it's totally agreed. I think, and there's nothing against South Africans, to be honest. I mean, it's not the fact that you just don't have the relationship. I mean, how much of our business is developed through relationships? And that's a core aspect here. Networking, building relationships takes a long time. In our industry, it can take you 12, 18 months before you develop a relationship which converts into some work. So investing in those is a long journey. Having someone on the ground that already has those relationships and are networked, worked in the field for other organizations, that's got a huge amount of value. And it may cost you, because, what people earn there and the cost of living is a lot higher than here.
Okay, so we've really transitioned through this initial stage. You had the first kind of bit of a economic crisis, if you will, forced you to adapt your approach into a bit more omni-channel. You're still based in the UK at this time. You just gave us some insights into what your current sales and distribution channels and approach looks like. Talk to me what happened next, right? You the credit crisis of 2008 was obviously, the biggest economic crisis I've experienced in my lifetime. Talk to me about how that impacted you and how you had to even adapt in that time.
So, I mean, we had a team, a front office team, project managers, account managers based in London, because in those days, clients were scared of outsourcing, and they wanted the physical presence, the face-to-face meeting. So you would, get on a train, tube, travel an hour to go and have a half an hour meeting with someone, and then travel back and then carry on with work. I think we forget how not so long ago that was the nature, how the day-to-day worked, but the credit crisis hit, and specifically the UK, which was particularly badly hit. I think South Africa was somewhat shielded from that at the time, but all our clients, the business just dried up, and after probably having a nice 7 or 8 year period of growth and success without much turmoil, this came, as another shock. I think our experiences in 2001, made us ready to respond to it, because I think with any shock and change that comes, you need to respond to it.
That makes me think the whole thing like this is not a drill. I think you can prepare, you can have contingency plans, you can worry about risk and whatnot, but it's also the resilience that comes from the fact that it's like, okay, we've been through a crisis before, means that you've almost got this kind of like muscle memory on how to respond, instead of being like, oh my gosh, the walls are falling down around me.
Yes, and I think we've had one in more recent years as well. But we had to just be cautious, because suddenly the revenue started to decline and dry up, and we had to retrench some of our team, adapt. It was also a time of reflection, because me personally, I had a son, and at the back of my mind, I was thinking of returning to South Africa at some point. So it was quite a transitional period as well. A lot of my friends also either had to return or they lost their jobs. So there was a whole movement around kind of personal factors as well as the business factors. We had our Cape Town operation. We didn't really have many South African clients. It was very much a UK focused business. 80-90% of the revenue was UK. And, we basically made a decision to shift the business towards almost an offshore model, in the sense of, closing off our front office in London, because we could route our calls into Cape Town directly, have a project team based in Cape Town that could answer the calls, talk to clients, and make it as seamless as possible for the clients, because we were moving towards less and less client interaction, all the time. And that's exactly what we did over that period. So essentially, we traded through it. I think a lot of the big brands and partners that we had were not busy, so there was not a lot of work. We picked up a lot of smaller work through direct clients. So you had to kind of move into a much more, I suppose, restraint or resilient mode to because history tells you these things pass in terms of it's not going to, when you're in it you think the world is ending, but within a year or two things started to improve, and you start to win work again, and you start feeding the pipeline, so to speak. And by that time the business had shifted to its kind of next stage, which was really having an offshore based team, 100% offshore based team in Cape Town, phones routing into Cape Town. I was going to go back, and I arrived back in 2011, and the business continued. I came over to London very regularly back in those days, 5 times a year, and saw clients. I probably didn't see them any less when I was living in London. So for them, I made it feel like there was no change, and we kept up that for some time. And I think, as the world adapted and changed, and as become offshoring and outsourcing became quite a far more popular way of working, it became easier. So again, you're kind of going with the trends of the day and the market. And at the same time, I suppose naturally, organically, you start getting involved and making contacts with people in South Africa, and there was more and more spend and value put into digital shop windows and platforms for the clients as they started to invest in their websites more and realized obviously the emergence of digital as a channel of marketing and sales was becoming more and more important in South Africa. So that's where movement and our market and our focus, in the South African economy started to grow as well. So, sometimes you make decisions, you don't know the outcome, but, things start to work and you identify those signals quite quickly. I suppose everything in the world somewhat changed from then because we live in a much more smaller cycle now. It's very fragmented. Those cycles of business, macro and micro things are changing much faster than they did back then. And then, I suppose the next big challenging point was the COVID days, in terms of not knowing what was going to happen to all of us as we as that hit, that didn't come slowly, that came quickly.
I think that'll be that's a whole nother story in itself. So let's just pause here for a sec just to unpack this, because I think what sets you up for success, obviously coming COVID now, is the fact that you'd really become familiar with working remotely in terms of this offshore business, at least with your clients. So I think that would have been a huge strength. But also just from a timing perspective, the fact that you'd already established this office in South Africa, it made more cost sense and more at least profit sense in terms of targeting the UK market, means that you'd already have this established business that's very skilled at working in digital software development and web development. So that's naturally what's happened, at least throughout the 2000s, is this shift in terms of whatever happens in the UK. Usually around 6 years later, so the South African market starts to catch up. So it means that as this demand for digital starts increasing in South Africa, you're already highly established and highly skilled, which means that you're just at the perfect timing to really take advantage of this demand in South Africa. So I imagine at that moment, there must have been quite a nice boom and growth curve in the business.
Yes, and I can't say that I foresaw that, in the sense of that was the key reason, but you make decisions and not always, I suppose we make a lot of decisions based on information and data, but we don't always know the outcome is going to be exactly what we expect it to be. So that was nice timing, and I think it was, a good growth period from, I suppose, 2012 to let's call it 2020 in terms of South African market. Started working with a lot of clients, and probably the most growth was experienced in the South African market for us. And we were primed for it because we came out of the UK. We've done this all before. We've got experience. We've got case studies. We had the expertise. So we were kind of, as I said earlier, it felt like a bigger fish in a smaller pond as a business. And we continue to win work and deliver work for clients and grow more organically. I think we had processes and operational know-how in terms of delivery. That's why, we can deliver multiple things, not just one project at a time. We can run multiple projects and multiple teams at the same time. While we continue to support our UK market. And sometimes you find just in how businesses work around the world, there's a bit of a dovetailing that can happen, seasonality, if you want to call it that. So where, we go into our summer season and Christmas season, generally things pick up in the UK because they don't take off 6 weeks over December. So they come out of this August, September, summertime, and you find by November things are new projects are coming in while South African market goes quiet. So there's a lot of benefit to that I suppose geographic side of the business in terms of how they can complement themselves, from that perspective. So it doesn't always work that way, but it has I can remember on a number of years it has has worked quite nicely in that way before.
Yeah. And I think also the benefit of I guess, a business with multiple geographies is, look, it's really hard to get it right because it's fundamentally different markets at the end of the day. And I think a lot of people struggle with that assumption. But when you do get it right, not only do you de-risking currencies on either side, but it's also at that same point, you are also de-risking markets. And depending on whatever volatility happens on a macro level or anything that happens within that market shift there may or may not be the same thing happening on the other side, which means that you've kind of got this de-risked approach. But on the word macro, right, you mentioned that there's been this kind of accelerating change in these macro and micro shifts in business over the years. What did you mean by that?
I suppose that how disruptive the world has become from a macro perspective. I mean, we've only just seen the 2 eras of Trump and how it's caused, friction and chaos in the world, which has a knock-on effect to other parts of the world, including ourselves. So we had, last year, was it 60 countries in the world having elections? Now, that's unprecedented. It's just how, I suppose the needle fell in that particular year, but that had a huge effect on decision-making within companies because, a lot of budgets were put on hold and let's wait and see attitude. We found a lot of decision-making very delayed last year. And
there's nothing a market dislikes more than uncertainty.
No, exactly. So probably since 2012, there's been this kind of continual, I call it a roller coaster, but I think that's almost the new norm of having to deal with multiple dynamics that are coming at you all the time and how you respond to those different dynamics and, probably also don't make overreactive decisions based on them. Try and stick to the basics of what you've been doing well and not be influenced incorrectly by some of the macro aspects. I mean, in South Africa, I think we're quite used to dealing with good and bad news, which seems to come, volatility. So we probably quite well oiled to deal with those sort of scenarios. But I think, as the pace of the world grows faster and more exponential, aspects like AI and how they disrupt what we do, and our remote working has shifted massively, in the South African context, not only globally. There's some pullback going on with that in parts of the world. If it's to what success it benefits the business or not. There's a lot of different dynamics at play all the time. So I think being an entrepreneur, there's a lot to deal with today.
So on the topic of macro and shifting and adapting, obviously one of the most macro things that has affected us in recent history is obviously COVID, right? What was the impact that had on you and how did you adapt to that?
Well, I think none of us predicted what was going to happen, in terms of like the impact. I think hindsight, we've seen the result in our own businesses of that. And, when it all came about and we all had to operate from home and we didn't know what our clients were going to do and turn around and say, thank you, but no thank you. I think a lot of businesses were impacted, where you had marketing retainers, clients thought, okay, we can't market now, we're going to stop all this. We were, most of our clients continued as normal and didn't make overreactive decision making. In fact, we found quite quickly within a month or two, there was new opportunities. And, as we spoke about pivoting, a lot of businesses looked at new tools and products and platforms that they needed to pivot their business. And that opened up new opportunities for us. And so we actually had a fairly decent year during COVID and that only grew into the next year. So we had the last 3 or 4 years, we've had some great results in the business. Which has been, the kind of growth trajectory we've kind of enjoyed. And now we've, we tried to now obviously establish the next steps of that into the future as we want to continue to grow the business. I think, keeping it the same, some may argue like, let's just keep a business that's profitable, nice and tidy and, we take home our earnings every year. But, I suppose, it's the I suppose the entrepreneur, you always want to move forward. If it's diversification, or if it's at the top end, it's always the revenue. It's a growth side, and the revenue and the new opportunities will pull the business along. So if that means you're having more people to deliver work, it's all part of the growth story.
100%. And I think the part of that danger of keeping it the same is that nothing in the universe stays the same, right? We're constantly fighting entropy, and we're constantly having to change and adapt at the same time. So now, considering this topic around change, let's bring it back to the present, right? So Nick, I'm curious now around this world of AI, right? This wasn't really nowhere near a thing pre-COVID compared to what it is now, right? What's the impact been on your industry, on your business? How are you thinking about this huge surge of AI happening in the world now?
I think there's also a lot of rhetoric around it, but clearly it's happening. It's been happening for longer than we've been talking about it. But I think how it's impacted us, we don't necessarily change the fundamentals of the business because something is a threat. I mean, where we see its benefit to us is certainly in speeding up development processes. So all the team members have their own GPT accounts, Copilot accounts, in terms of code generation. Certainly a lot of the administrative and menial tasks that were once, we may take you an hour or an hour and a half a day. A lot of those can be conducted by AI agents, processes, and that allows essentially the individual to do more, and become more efficient in what they do. So you could argue on a larger scale that's going to mean you can achieve more with the resources that you've got and work faster. There's still we are in a challenge where and we find it with interviewing developers and that sort of thing, that we are in a point where maybe the reliance on it creates complacency and maybe laziness, because ultimately, if you're building some code base or application, the individual needs to know what they're doing. They may get the agent to produce the code, but actually they need to understand what's been written there. Likewise with content, we can generate content and get lazy at, but don't proofread it and adapt it, and make sure it's authentic and sound like we want it to sound, or what it should sound. So those are the challenges that are around it, but there's definitely going to be huge benefits of it, how we utilize it more and more. As I said as well, that we have platforms where there are built-in AI aspects to the tools. We see it with you see it with chatbots and agents on websites now being more intelligent in terms of how they interface and who you're dealing with. It may sound like an individual, a real person, but it obviously may not be.
Yeah, 100%. And you just highlighted a principle for me here, is that what's the best way to not be disrupted by new technology is to use it.
Yes, I think you have to start using it in the business, and don't be scared of it. I think you can't avoid it, because that's where your mistakes and you'll start to stagnate. And that's why I said earlier, you mentioned it as well, is like, don't let the business stagnate, because you want to move forward. That's why processes you put in were great 5 years ago, but there may be better ones now. There's so many tools out there, so you're always reinventing from within and with an exterior and from the exterior. It's a continual kind of process. That's why I say you're almost in a startup mode all the time, because you're reinventing yourself and the business as you go. So those are the challenges. Obviously, scaling at the same time, will bring various disruptive aspects to the business, and you have to deal with those.
100%. So now looking into the future, right? where do you see things going for yourself and for Bluegrass Digital? And, what are the challenges that you're currently facing in getting there?
Look, the future, we continue to grow the business. I think as the founders get older, we may start considering things like, do we sell the business or exit it or do a management buyout? I think we still got work to do. We want to scale, and how we scale, in terms of a business that's primarily a project delivery business, there's a limit to how much we could scale it given, even with more people. I think we have to look at other models to scale in terms of maybe a resourcing approach or a recruiting talent approach to scale the business. And that's for our clients, not for ourselves. Obviously we recruit in, but I'm saying talent as a service in the IT sector is a very popular concept. It's far more scalable than trying to deliver more and more projects because you require teams and oversight and management. And we're very sensitive to quality in terms of delivery excellence at the end of the day. So, it is about growth. That trajectory over the next 3 to 5 years is a goal of ours, to hit our sort of revenue goals. And then potentially we will be in a position where we can get best value out of it. And there might be an exit. It might be a management buyout, might be to someone overseas, it might be to a local company. The reason why an M&A or a exit might make sense to someone could be a capacity, it could be expertise, it could be adding revenue to their top line. There are various reasons, and I've had many of those conversations over the years. But I think that's kind of where we're at in our journey at the moment.
Awesome. Sounds like an exciting journey to be in. It's really thinking in terms of a new chapter, new act, different goals, different stages. But I guess that's life, that's entrepreneurship. Nick, thank you for being on the podcast and sharing your insights. The final question I have for you is, what's the one question that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you that you'd like to answer now?
Wow, that's a trick question right at the end. Well, I think in our world and business, it's very much about our people. I think people are an important part of your puzzle. They are the number one. So when you're scaling a team, a business like ours, selecting the right people and building your team and layers within that, which talks to your culture, I think that's a very key aspect that many struggle with and maybe take a while to get right. But I think that's quite a key element. Our people are our number one asset in the business, and that's to be able to scale, you do need the right people and around that, the processes and purpose to support that.
100%. Nick, thank you very much for being on the Founder Files. Can't wait to see you at the next Civitas meetup, and can't wait to see the next chapter in your amazing story.
Great, Cameron. Thanks for having me. Look forward to listening soon.
So I spoke about this with Nick offline, and obviously by now you know that what we help very much with is scaling strategy. But what a lot of people don't know is that what we offer is a breakthrough sprint where we really do a valuation on your company, but then also look at your scaling readiness. So before even thinking about what your scaling strategy is, we take kind of stock of what the current events are in your business, do a valuation to see what scenarios can be pulled to see how is it that you can maximize that evaluation. But really just taking stock of where you're at now and what is it you want to get out of this business moving forward. And obviously, if you're in a similar time frame to where Nick is, where you're thinking about the bigger picture, you're also starting to really think about what the value of the business is that you built, and you're wondering, what strategy I should take now, whether that could be succession, management, buyout, etc. This could be a good place to start by having a conversation with me. We can have a short valuation of your business and just a chat around what the scaling readiness looks like and whatever your goals might be to get this business to the next stage and for you to maximize the value of what you've spent so many years building. So if you want to have a conversation about that, please reach out to me. You can either do so through LinkedIn or follow the link in the description of this podcast below to set up a call. Would love to be able to help you with that. But that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening to another full episode of the Founder Files, and I will see you next time. Cheers.